Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Welcome everybody. Thanks so much for being here. It's really exciting. So many people registered for this. It's great. I can't see your faces, but that's okay. I know you're here and it's exciting. My name's Freya McGregor. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the owner and consultant at Access Birding. I'm also a disabled birder and an occupational therapist. And if you need closed captions, they are in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. There's a small button with a CC and like a speech bubble around it. Once you click on that, you can change the font size of your captions, and you can click on the captions and drag them around to somewhere else on your screen if you need to, which is really great. Okay, there's a chat feature. Hopefully you just saw me put in a comment. Please go ahead and introduce yourself with your name, your pronouns if you feel comfortable, maybe where you're tuning in from, why you're interested in this. If you have a disability and you feel comfortable sharing that, we'd love to hear from you. And please go ahead and introduce yourself. But as we continue with this presentation today, please share your thoughts, your questions, your ideas, your own experiences with adaptive birding equipment or with birding with a disability in general. We would love to hear from you, and we're going to have plenty of time at the end to answer questions and have a discussion. Depending on how many people are still here, we might not be able to unmute. It might be a bit hard to manage that, but really excited to hear your questions and ideas and get into this. So before we do, again, please unmute yourself if you can. We have captions. Let's see. So yes, so my name's Freya McGregor. My pronouns are she, her. As I said, I'm a disabled birder and an occupational therapist, and Alex is going to explain more about occupational therapy if you're unfamiliar. I do a lot of work around access, inclusion, disability and birding, and one of those roles is I run a business called Access Birding, which provides consulting and training services to nature-based organisations to empower staff and volunteers to be confident agents of change in improving access and inclusion for disabled birders. I provide consulting and training all around this stuff. So if you'd like to learn more about that, the website is Access Birding, or you can follow access.birding on Instagram or on Facebook. I'll share those links in the chat in a minute. I also work part-time at Virginia Tech as a research associate, and I'm involved in projects related to access, inclusion, disability and birding. And so even though this is through the Access Birding hat, I'm really interested in helping develop more evidence to support accessible and inclusive birding opportunities for disabled folks. So it's exciting to be working with Alex on this project. Now, Alex is a doctorate of occupational therapy student, and that's a 3 and a bit year program. The last thing he has to do is spend 3 months full-time doing like a project, not field work, not clinical work, but a project. And he's spent the last 3 months with me remotely. We live in different states, working on this. And one of his requirements is to share his findings with the occupational therapy department. Now, I'm a business of one, so I don't have an OT department. So thank you all for being here, because the reason we're holding this partly is so that Alex can fulfill this requirement of his capstone. And it's exciting to be able to share this with more people. I know there's some occupational therapists here, but more people who might find this interesting or benefit from this. So again, thank you for being here. It's really encouraging that you have made time to spend with us today. Finally, this is an uncomfortable thing to say, but it's less uncomfortable to me to say it than it might be if something actually happens. So hopefully this goes without saying, but we won't be tolerating any kind of comments that are racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist, or otherwise offensive, derogatory comments. Sometimes it's you say something and you didn't mean it to come out that way, or it reads differently in text because we can't hear your tone of voice. So if something comes up like that in the chat, I'll give you an opportunity to clarify your intent with that. And if you don't do that, then I will remove you from this this space, because we what we really want to make sure that this space is welcoming and inclusive and safe for everybody who is here. So again, I'm sure this won't happen. It's really uncomfortable for me to even say this, but the harm that could result is much worse than my discomfort. So finally, before we get into it, I want to give a big thank you to the participants of this study who will remain confidential, but without their input and experience and thoughtful participation, we wouldn't have any results to share with you. I also want to thank Celestron, Opticron and Vortex, who provided us with free or heavily discounted optics so that we would have equipment to trial in this study. So big thanks to them. And there's been a bunch of other folks who've been really crucial in this project too. I know Katie and Spencer, who I don't know personally, they're folks Alex has worked with, but thank you for all your help with this. And so I'm going to mute myself, turn off my video, and over to you, Alex. Once Alex has finished presenting, which will take about 20 minutes, there'll be heaps of time for conversation and discussion and questions. So please throw your questions in the chat. Okay, Alex, up to you.
All right. So hello, everybody, and thank you, Freya, for that introduction. And just thank you all for joining today just to learn about the research that Freya and I have been completing over the last 3 months. So today we're going to discuss the importance of this research, different mount and optic features that support birding for individuals with disabilities, as well as some of the key findings that we found throughout this research process. And so I just want to take a brief moment to just introduce what occupational therapy is. And so occupational therapists serve individuals of all ages and diagnoses, anything from broken arms to traumatic brain injuries. We help people get back to doing the things that they want to do and that they need to do to have the best quality of life that they can. And so you might find occupational therapists in hospitals, private practices, or maybe you find them out in nature helping disabled birders use adaptive equipment. Who knows? And so what makes this research so important is the fact that there are no studies that currently exist related to adaptive birding equipment. Well, for disabled birders specifically. And so this research that does exist is more specific to the mental health benefits that one experiences from being out in nature and engaging with birds, but not necessarily on the equipment that they're using while they're engaging with the birds. And so also it's been found that individuals with disabilities are a little bit more underserved and marginalized by the healthcare system when it comes to receiving the care and the treatments that they need. And we know that people use wheelchairs for various reasons, both cognitive and physical disabilities. So we designed this research to, in hopes that, we could reach all different disabilities, not just the ones that are represented within our research study. And so knowing this, the objectives that Freya and I had for the research were to personally assess the features of the existing mounts and optics, and then to recruit disabled birders to trial the equipment that we obtained, and then to identify the features of the products that they felt best supported their ability to bird from their wheelchairs, with the main overarching goal of helping the public gain more knowledge on how to bird more successfully, or how to help others to do so by creating a more inclusive and accessible birding location. And so what makes the mount so crucial for disabled birders is, one, that it just limits the need for them to hold the optics by simply just attaching it to a mount. So if individuals have decreased hand function and limited range of motion caused by maybe a stroke, holding an optic can be quite difficult sometimes. And so another reason that we focused on the mount is there's actually no mounts that currently are available specific to adaptive birding. And so we wanted to determine what features of existing mounts could then be applied to design ideas for adaptive birding mounts. The majority of the mounts that we use for this research were meant for holding phones and other small and light devices. And so there are many challenges with the strength and the stability, in addition to some of the exterior materials being a little bit troublesome as well. Specifically, our participants were all power wheelchair users. And as you can see, there was a wide range of birding experience wheelchair functions, as well as a variety of physical limitations that they all had as well. So participant 1 had a form of muscular dystrophy, which limited their range of motion in both of their arms and prevented them from actually lifting past shoulder height. Participants 2 and 3 had sustained C5 to C6 spinal cord injuries. And for those who are unfamiliar, that means that the spinal cord was injured in the neck region between the 5th and the 6th vertebrae. So depending on if a spinal cord injury is complete or incomplete, the nerves beyond the level of that injury will either be completely damaged or partially damaged. So in this case, both the participants had decreased finger dexterity and challenges with range of motion in their arms. And then participant 4 had a form of dwarfism, and so they had difficulties getting the equipment positioned in a spot that was ideal for grasping and viewing through the optics. And so after we recruited our participants, we then sent the equipment for them to trial. Participants scheduled a time that worked best for them, and then they met up to complete a 2-hour trialing session with that equipment. And then after that, Freya and I met with all 4 of them together to do a collaborative focus group and talk about the findings that they had found. That also lasted about 2 hours as well. So through funding from the Salmon Center at my university, as well as donations that Freya mentioned from Vortex, Celestron, and Opticron, we were able to obtain and analyze 10 different mounts. We had 3 different binocular options, 3 monocular options, and then we had 4 spotting scopes as well. So I selected equipment that would offer a wide variety of features and options, such as different clamping styles, different weights, thicknesses, and flexibilities. And I also selected some different attachment pieces that would help the optics attach to the mount a little bit easier. And so participants primarily use the pan tilt head and the ball head attachments that you see there on the screen. What we didn't take into account, unfortunately, is just how overwhelming it may have been for the participants to assemble and use all this equipment independently, just given some of the physical limitations that I mentioned earlier. And then so due to that, participants were able to trial 4 different mounts, and then they focused their time primarily on 2 of the spotting scope options that they felt were most beneficial and supported them the most. And so getting into some of the supportive features of the mounts themselves, we'll kind of start by talking about the mounts, because if the mount is unable to be secured on the wheelchair or the power scooter, then the optic is most likely going to have a little bit of trouble being supported as well. So mounts that contain smaller ball joints cause the mount to lose a lot of its strength and stability with some of the heavier optics. And so it was brought up that by using like a larger ball joint that could then reinforce the mount, make it a lot stronger. And so the 2 participants that have spinal cord injuries, they don't have the ability to, focus the optics using their fingers. And so what they do is they use the side of their hand, similar to this, on the focus wheel. And so that causes a lot of pressure on the mount and causes it to lose some of its stability as well. As far as the tightening devices, there were 2 different features of the tightening devices that were troublesome, one being a texture related and the other being a size issue. And so mounts that offer only metal adjustment knobs, this is a problem because if there's not a grippy texture on the knobs, individuals that maybe have Parkinson's disease, that have decreased strength and finger mobility could then have some trouble with either finding the knobs with their fingers, or their fingers may just slip off because there's not a lot of grippy surface. And then if we think about the size of these focus knob, or the size of the tightening knobs, if we make them a little bit longer and a little bit wider, this could allow people with, say, arthritis to be able to tighten and loosen those knobs by using maybe more so their palm or their hand, instead of having to use their fingers and potentially causing some pain with that. And so including 3 joints on the mount body really allows the mount to be positioned in a different angle or any different configuration, and allows the user to kind of adapt it to their own needs as opposed to mounts that are more so stationary and in one plane. And so the ideal clamping system was actually one that's multifunctional, meaning that would be able to clamp to both a round and a square surface. So as you can see, the frame of this wheelchair can be fully surrounded by the clamp and then tightened down really securely. But what you can't see is on that clamp, there's two freely moving metal plates on either side of the clamp that when positioned inward, create kind of a squared off edge and allow it to be positioned around a square surface, which makes the mount a little bit more universal for different wheelchair styles. And then an aluminum alloy design was agreed by all participants to be very strong, stable, and lightweight. And so moving into some of the mount design ideas, participants actually favored the monopod options. And so monopods can be moved freely in space, and so they can be put anywhere that it's needed to best view through the scope. And so to go along with the monopod, there were two design ideas that participants felt would give them the most support while they're birding. And so the first would be to create a sort of plate that you can slide under the wheelchair seat cushion. And so this plate would then extend outward between the legs slightly and have an adjustable clamp holder that could support a monopod of all sizes. And then so once the monopod's in the holder, then you could just be able to tighten it down, make sure it's secure and not moving around when you're not using the monopod. And then the other design that they came up with was similar in the sense that the monopod would be supported with an adjustable clamp. However, it would be attached to the footrest of the wheelchair instead of under the seat cushion. So depending on the individual, some may not have the ability to reach as far, and so mounting it closer to the body could be a little bit more advantageous for those people. So as we transition into using binoculars, I just wanted to touch on some of the functional skills that individuals may need to use binoculars successfully and independently. And so starting with vision, this could be important, obviously, to be able to see through the optics themselves. So individuals who are blind or maybe have low vision could have some difficulties in this area. If we think about things like coordination, whether it's fine motor or gross motor, meaning completing some of those small movements or those bigger movements, these are going to be important when we're manipulating the focus knobs or other movable parts of the binoculars, just getting them into position for the best viewing. So if we think about people who maybe have decreased coordination due to a brain injury, this could cause some difficulties with these types of tasks as well. And then lastly, sometimes you want to remain upright when viewing the birds, not always, but sometimes. And so maintaining that strong trunk control is something that could be very important. So individuals with maybe multiple sclerosis, diagnoses such as that could have some difficulties doing this. And then as we move into some of the supportive features of the binoculars, we'll start by talking about the focus knobs. And so for individuals that have decreased fine motor function or decreased finger dexterity, having a focus knob that's similar to the one in this drawing would be really helpful. Because typically when you're focusing, you need to move your finger kind of back and forth like this, and that takes a lot of fine motor coordination. And so having a design similar to what you see here with the grooves and the indents really allows the individual to maybe dig their finger into one of those grooves and then use their whole hand to focus instead of having to have that fine motor coordination that they may not have in their fingers. Along with this, the hinge on the binoculars is what helps it move out and in. So depending on how wide your eyes are spread apart or just what's most comfortable for you, having that hinge allows you to tailor it to your own needs. And so if the hinge is a little bit too tight, that can cause a lot of trouble for someone who maybe has an amputation or somebody that has to just do that with one hand. Could be a lot of trouble for them. So binoculars that are too heavy add a lot of pressure to the mounting system and then can cause it to collapse on itself. So creating a lightweight design can help to alleviate some of that added pressure and help the mount maintain its stability. So including a thread on the binoculars allows them to attach to the mount a lot easier and more securely. So another thing about the binoculars, typically they have a little cap on the very end here. And if you unscrew that, it leads to a thread that can then be mounted to a mount, which is really cool for a tripod or anything that you want to use it with. And then lastly, for individuals who maybe have a neuropathy in their hands, sensation and grip may become compromised. And so having a rubber material on the outside of the optics can really help them to hold and manipulate the optics a lot easier. And so as we move into binoculars and spotting scopes, I first want to talk about the idea of this rotating sleeve. So at the bottom of the sleeve, there's a thread that attaches to the mount, so it's nice and secure. And then if I unscrew this knob on the side, that allows me to then move the optic anywhere within that ring, which is a really cool feature if we think about somebody with like cerebral palsy who maybe doesn't have a lot of movement in their trunk. They can mount the scope wherever they need to and then move it closer to them instead of having it over here and needing to lean in. It just makes it a little bit more functional for individuals such as that. Sorry. And so next I want to talk about the focus knob. So focus knobs are sometimes placed in areas on the optic that are a little bit harder to access. And so just having a focus knob that's more exposed just allows the user to refocus it faster and hopefully not have to look away from what they're viewing to do so. And so sometimes spotting scopes have a range of magnification, and then typically once you start zooming in, the optic pinpoints on one specific thing, and then your field of view becomes a lot smaller as well. And so having the range of magnification really allows for obviously that wider field of view, but it also gives you a bigger margin of error for if you're trying to locate the bird, which is also helpful. So having an angled eyepiece allows the user to mount the scope a little bit lower and let the eyepiece come to them, and really lessens the need for them to have to support the optic at eye level and reposition or refocus it, using some of that range of motion or dexterity that they may not have. And then similar to the binoculars, including a grippy material on the focus knobs and the exterior surface of the optics really allow for that easier grasp manipulation for people who have impaired sensation or that decreased grip as well. And then again, just creating binoculars and scopes that are built more lightweight help to take that pressure off the mount and support its stability as well. And then the last thing that was brought up by participants was the electric focus. And so including an electric focus for optics really allows the user to, again, refocus without looking away from the bird. But this feature would also really benefit people who have strokes or spinal cord injuries who may have the decreased ability to actually physically lift their arms up to the optic. So they could just leave them on their armrests and then use a little knob to help focus it. And also, again, that's going to help with the stability of the mount because you don't have to place that extra pressure on top of the optic to refocus. So digiscoping was an alternative method that came up from participants. And so this actually helps by limiting the need for the user to have to focus their eye through the lens. So by using an attachment similar to what you see here, the user can then attach their phone or their tablet to the scope and use that to enhance the field of view. So this could be really useful for people who may have a tremor in their hands or tend to shake the scope a lot and dampen that image, or for people who have low vision and need to see the image a little bit larger than what's available just through that eyepiece. And so we hope that this research helps to benefit disabled birders, occupational therapists, and other health professionals to take their previous knowledge of mounting systems and expand it to think more broadly on how the mount can impact the birding experience for disabled birders. If we think about nature-based organizations, this research provides information on different equipment options that they could have available for rent for disabled birders that come to their locations, as well as offering as a guide to assist this population with, getting comfortable using the equipment before they go out on the trails. And then lastly, the optics companies can utilize this research by reviewing the design concepts and these things brought about by participants to create a more accessible and inclusive optic option that better suits disabled birders. And so we've really only scratched the surface with this work. If I was to expand on this project, I would first really like to create a prototype of the mount design ideas that participants shared and really test the effectiveness of those with other disabled birders. I'd really like to include more participants so that obviously more data could be collected, but also so a wider variety of disabilities could be represented within this research. And then lastly, I want to explore some of the higher tech options that are available and get a wider variety of mounts and optics just to add a little bit more valuable research to future research. So just a big thank you to everybody for being here, listening in on this, to everybody that Freya had mentioned at the beginning of this PowerPoint. None of this would have happened if it wasn't for all of the supporters throughout this research. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Alex. That was very excellent. I'm thrilled at all the work you've done over the last 3 months. Thank you for sharing so much of this with everybody here. And we had a bit of a chat going on. Chip, thank you for sharing. There was a binocular Bushnell as an optics manufacturer, and Chip shared in the chat about one of their models, Alex, that has a lever focus. Lever. In Australia, that's called a lever, which is a really interesting idea. I didn't know anything about it. So that was really cool, Chip. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. There's a link, Chip shared a link too, if anyone wants to just look at what that looks like. Please share your questions, your comments, your thoughts, your ideas, your queries in the chat, because we have lots of time now. And we hope this will be a helpful discussion for everyone who's shown up. Alex has lots of love in the chat for you and for this presentation. In the chat, another focus option for people with limited hand function is an autofocus that's typically used for telescopes. It's pricey at about $100, but works well for me. Thank you. Yeah, so that whole electric focus idea is a really interesting one, and there are lots of folks who haven't got hand function or haven't got very much hand function, where being able to use a switch could enable them to focus optics. It's such a cool idea to for optics manufacturers to think about electric focuses. And someone asked, when at registration there was an opportunity to share questions that you had, and someone asked about DIY adaptive birding equipment. So I've got a couple of websites to share with you in the chat of some people that we know who have created or had created for them mounting systems and adaptive optics. It's super cool. The thing we are trying to do with this research is make this idea of adaptive birding equipment go from people solving problems themselves, if they happen to know someone who's got a really good engineering brain and knows how to build all these things, to a conversation that is happening in the optics manufacturers and in the broader birding community, where this is something that people are thinking about all the time, because there are lots and lots of birders with disabilities, and there are lots and lots of people with disabilities who could be birders, and we can get so much out of birding, right? And so having equipment that supports different people engaging in this activity in different ways is something that's really valuable. So autofocus, I can't speak and read a chat at the same time. I'm not very good at that, but it's such a cool idea. Autofocus, electronic focus using telescopes, Bluetooth focus. There's all kinds of ideas there, and it would be so cool to see optics companies building equipment that has this capability, or has this capability as an add-on, not that somebody has to custom build one at a time. But in the meantime, someone else also asked a question ahead of time about funding options for adaptive birding equipment. And Alex, do you want to share? I'll pull the link across, but do you want to share the resource you have about potential funding options?
Yeah, so through this capstone project, I've met obviously so many wonderful people and organizations. And one of the really cool, it's a Michigan-based company. So I know we have a lot of people joining from all sorts of areas, but they're called the Michigan Disability Rights Coalition. And they have an extension within that called the Michigan Assistive Technology Program. And so they actually do this really cool thing where they give demonstrations on the adaptive equipment, and they allow individuals to actually just borrow and trial the equipment on their own for any amount of time that's agreed upon. And then if you're interested in purchasing that equipment at the end of your trialing session, then they can help you find resources for funding if necessary. And they actually have, I think Freya said she's going to be sharing that with you, but there's a list of resources right on their website that you can take a look at ahead of time as well.
Yeah, and I don't know about every state, but I know quite a few states have adaptive equipment organizations that often build custom equipment for people for different uses. So I know there's some folks in Pennsylvania. Tech Owl PA is their Instagram handle, I think. That's how I know about them, because I follow them on Instagram and they do really cool stuff. So there might be an organization near you that has the capabilities and possibly funding sources for building customized adaptive birding equipment. But again, we really want this to become a broader conversation. And what we were really hoping to find in this research was a mount that we could, that's already out there, that exists, that hopefully is under $100, that could do all the things we wanted it to do. Ideally, it's something that exists and we could point you directly to it and say, go buy that thing. It's perfect. It does everything fantastically. We don't have that answer for you, sadly. What we did find was what features would create that ideal mount. But it would be a wonderful thing for that to just be a product that exists in the world for anyone to get hold of, regardless of whether they, know someone who's got all the handy skills. Okay, what other questions do we have? I'm excited by the digiscoping idea. Trying to find something and focus the optics, then pass it to my boyfriend and then re-find the thing and refocus. Yes. So this was digiscoping. I've had success using digiscoping for a variety of different reasons. And, Alex mentioned some before, but another reason, if you're involved in bird outings with a group and there's a scope that's a communal scope that's set up on a tripod, it's not always easy for someone to maneuver into exactly the right position around a tripod to get their eyeball on the eyepiece. And so having a tablet, for example, on a mount attached to the scope removes that need to be in the perfect position. Like I think Alex said, even if you have your own personal optics set up on a mount, having even a cell phone, much smaller screen, but having a cell phone attached to the optic using it like for digiscoping means that you don't have to get your eyeball in that perfect position, which can be difficult or impossible for some folks. So digiscoping is super cool. Also, as Alex mentioned, folks who have low vision, perhaps having the image shown up on a tablet screen will make it a lot more visible to them than the small image through the eyepiece. So digiscoping has a lot of scope. My husband will be most proud of that terrible pun. If you're interested in digiscoping, there are a few manufacturers out there who make mounts for specific optics and specific, smartphones or tablets. And there are some that make mounts that are sort of more generally, universal for different pieces of technology. I use inverted commas with universal because universal design principles are things we love dearly as occupational therapists, but many things are not as universal as they say they are. So I'm just using caution. All right. Let's see, how would one, go about finding more on the digiscopes. This would be great for those with difficulty with their vision. Yeah, so hopefully I just answered that question. So it's not a special object. It's your regular scope or binoculars and a smartphone or a tablet. Some people do digiscoping, they hold it, so they hold their binoculars up and their phone up in position. That's called digiscoping too, but that probably doesn't resolve the query that we have right here. So yeah, the specialist mounts, if you just Google digiscoping mounts, you'll probably find something that you're looking for. PhoneScope is a company that they build mounts specific to like your iPhone 7 or whatever number it is these days, and whatever pair of binoculars you have, and so that the things fit together like a glove. So yeah, but there are other brands out there that do digiscoping type equipment.
Yeah, just to add to that, the picture that I had put in the PowerPoint, so that scope.
Go back to it, Alex.
Yeah. So let's see. So yeah. So yeah, so this scope actually came with the attachment piece. So you could buy this. This whole thing was a set. So it comes with the little tripod, comes with the scope, and it comes with the attachment piece. And I believe this was roughly $200, which is, as far as scopes go, is a pretty affordable scope, I would say. And then to have that attachment piece with that is really valuable as well. But the thing about this attachment is that you can unscrew it, and it has like a lot of different width capability for different phones, and the screw-on attachment can be widened depending on the size of your camera. So it's really adjustable for whatever, more so for phones, but instead of tablets, but really adjustable for whichever phone that you have, which is cool. So.
Great, thanks, Alex. So another question or comment is that good solid mounting is important when the person has a movement disorder like cerebral palsy. So the mount needs to be stable even though the user is moving. And yes, and that's actually, so one of the limitations, this was an exploratory study, there's nothing being done like it. So this is just getting, the feelers out there for what exists, what doesn't exist, baseline kind of information. One of the limits to our study is that the folks who were trialing this equipment, because of time constraints and other things, weren't actually able to get out on trails and test out these mounts and these optics actually doing the thing of birding. And so they had already found that none of the mounts held up the weight of the optics. So we sort of had already got to this sort of the point, but that's one of the reasons that, yeah, the strength of the mount is really valuable, really important, especially if someone is focusing using the side of their hand and having to push down on the mount, as Alex said, but also the stability. If you're going over bumps and things like that, like, you're out in nature doing stuff with your wheelchair, and if the mount's too kind of flimsy, not attached firmly, or just doesn't stay in its position, it's going to be really frustrating to use when you're already having to reposition it a lot, or reposition the attachment a lot to get on birds that move. Birds don't just sit directly in front of you at eye level. So, there's lots of moving parts. Wow, the puns are going well today. Question for you, Alex. Did you consider head-mounted optics?
Like you said, head-mounted?
Yeah, this is from the chat.
Actually, I did very early on. That was like an early design consideration that I had thought of. I guess I'm not sure why I didn't pursue that a little bit more, but I guess I thought that maybe it would be difficult to like get the optics out of the way. I've never really seen that design actually in existence, and so I thought it might be difficult to actually get the optics out of the way when you're not using them. And then it would, like, if you needed to look at your friend or somebody, like, okay, like, how do I get these out of the way? So it seemed like it might be a little bit cumbersome in a way, but yeah, I did think about it though.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. I think we're really trying to find something that already exists, or to help the things that already exist be more accessible in how they are designed. For example, all those features that Alex shared about with binoculars and scopes, they're not special features. They could just be incorporated in every pair of optics that comes out. That's what universal design is, that there's flexibility of use and equity of use in products that anybody can use the same way because they've been designed really well from the beginning. Having to design and manufacture something that is like specific and extra is probably going to be a harder ask. And I don't know anything about head mounted optics, but I'm guessing, because I've never run into them in the birding world, that they would be kind of considered like a specialty product. And so that's probably going to be harder. You know, that they might be built, speaking of equity, they might be built with lower quality glass, really heavy, like, you know, I think in the chat was mentioned that those Bushnell binoculars weren't a really high quality pair of binoculars. So we want to make sure that folks with access needs, specific access needs to accessing optics, have the same access to high level optics as someone who's non-disabled, right? That's equity. And so when equipment is designed from scratch with the principles of universal design, things like having a really textured focus knob could just be on every pair of optics. Wouldn't that be cool? And then it wouldn't be a special thing that you can only use this one pair because this is the only pair that's designed like that. You could just use any pair of optics that you wanted because they were all designed in a way that benefits everybody. Because that's access. Access usually benefits everybody, not just the people who specifically need that access feature. A question was, is this only for birders in Michigan? Yeah, so that the program that Alex mentioned is state specific. I think a lot of them are state specific, but have a look in your own state if you're not in Michigan, because there might be something. There's someone else has shared that Massachusetts has an assistive technology loan program. So yeah, and I know Pennsylvania as well. I'm sure there's more. Let's see.
Real quick, I
Very
did just want to
interesting.
mention too, that I know this is obviously specific to birding, but the Michigan Assistive Technology Program, they do loan out more than just birding equipment. So it's any outdoor recreation equipment that you could really need or want to use. So
All right. Alex, did you consider point and shoot digital cameras that have good autofocus features? They can also be paired with a tablet.
I had not considered that. That's a really good point though. Yeah.
Yeah, I know lots of birders, myself included, sometimes bird with a camera,
Oh
not
yeah.
because you're necessarily taking artistic photos, but you're taking a photo that you can then zoom in on. The bird's not moving anymore, and you can have a slow, gentle look at some of those ID, like those field marks. And so, yeah, birding with a camera instead of an optic in this context is a really cool idea. The mount thing, the requirements, the features of the mount, if someone needs the mount, it's probably the same whether they're using a camera or binoculars or scope, would you say, Alex?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Unless they've got a gigantic like mirrorless or a DSLR camera that's really, really heavy. But a point and shoot camera, and lots of those like kind of hybrid cameras might be equivalent weights as some of these optics for a mount like this. All right.
Yeah, you could say the same thing about like using like a scope that's in the picture here. Like you probably wouldn't be able to mount that very easily, similar to like you wouldn't be able to mount a camera that's that big too. So it's probably meant for more smaller devices. But
Yeah, and we found that, didn't we, with this research, that the scopes that were smaller, sometimes they're marketed as like travel scopes or even handheld scopes, monoculars sometimes, because they weigh less. They're just easier to manage when you're trying to mount it to a mount on a wheelchair.
right.
But there was one big problem with the monoculars, wasn't there, Alex?
Yeah, so the binocular options that we had for this study, none of them had a threaded capability. And so as I mentioned earlier, like being able to have that thread allows it to be attached to a mount more easily. I did have some attachment pieces that were Velcro that would attach to the actual mount itself. But I found that once you put the binocular inside the Velcro, it kind of got a little bit wobbly when you were focusing it. So it made it a little bit difficult. So,
And those Velcro things are designed for binoculars, right? So
right. Yeah.
they're big enough to hold two barrels, and you're only putting one barrel in, so they're sort of
Mhm.
a bit loose in there. Yeah. So that's another really great point about universal design. Monoculars, my understanding is monoculars are usually designed for hunters who are hand holding them. But I know a lot of birders, my husband included, who prefer using monoculars versus binoculars for birding. But if you don't manufacture them with a thread, you remove the ability for anybody to mount them on anything they want to. But a thread is a tiny little inside thing that has no negative side effect, as far as I'm aware, if you don't need it. So incorporating threads into all optics would be one way of supporting this idea of universal design, because you're not limiting people to how they might use that piece of equipment, however they need to use that piece of equipment. So that was a really cool finding from this study. Speaking of this study, I didn't mention at the beginning, but Alex and I are working on a manuscript for submission to a peer-reviewed journal. It's probably not going to be published for a few months because that's how this kind of works. But if you're interested in that manuscript once it's out and published, please sign up for the Access Birding newsletter, which is very irregular, I promise, after a few initial early emails. You can do that on the Access Birding website, which is accessbirding.com. Any page on the website, the newsletter sign up is down the bottom of the page. I just put that link in the chat. Also, as I mentioned, Access Birding on Instagram is at access.birding, and on Facebook at Access Birding. And I will be sharing slightly modified illustrations like the ones Alex had there. And once the journal article is out, I will be sharing about it there. But the best way would be the Access Birding newsletter if you're interested in diving in deeper to the findings than we had time to present today. I do want to be respectful of folks' time. So we did advertise this as a 45-minute event, which we're already 2 minutes over. So if you need to go, please feel free. We will hang out for a bit longer. There's more questions in the chat. There might be more coming. So we're absolutely happy to hang out longer. But if you need to go and you only budgeted 45 minutes, thanks so much for coming. Really appreciate it. And please share about adaptive birding equipment to all the birders, for all the folks with disabilities you know, to anyone you know who's selling optics, people who are running outings and have loaner equipment to offer. The more we can get the word out about adaptive birding equipment, the more folks might be able or convinced to enjoy birding. All right, so let's keep going. We heard about low vision optics offered by Eschenbach, a German company that offers 4 times binoculars, which we may get for Dan to use for TV. This was the first time we'd heard of Eschenbach. We have not researched all of their products yet. Eschenbach, yeah. So my background as an occupational therapist is in blindness and low vision services, and those folks make magnifiers, like for reading. They're a really big brand for reading magnifiers. So that's really cool to know that they have binoculars as well. And that 4 times zoom is that's not very much magnification for binoculars, but like Alex said, might actually be really helpful for folks because it gives you a greater margin of error in positioning them correctly onto a bird, because you haven't squeezed your field of view in so much that you have to be exactly on that bird or you'll completely miss it. So yeah, super cool. Let's see, what else is here? Do you have any contacts at these equipment companies that you could present findings from the focus groups? Possibly they could use the information to modify their equipment to be more user-friendly. Yes, in fact, 2 people from these optics companies are with us right now. So they are hearing everything that you have heard. Great question. Yes. And we're hopeful that some of this feedback will be incorporated into future designs. Absolutely. There is a great Digiscope phone mount that has up, down, left, right, fine level adjustment. Just purchased and highly recommended. Cool. If you want to share in the chat, which you might have already done, Paul, on that would be awesome to know what works for you in that regard. Yes, we'll send the recording out in a couple of days. Yes, absolutely, to everyone who registered. Barn owls need to come back and nest outside our house again so we can watch them with the new tech. Oh man, barn owls. Yes, please. Thank you, Christina. You're on a roll here, Freya, but I'll have to let you know I'm laughing over here. You all are amazing. Thank you. I'm reading that aloud so that Alex hears it, not because I want to pat myself on the back, but it's exciting to be doing work that that I'm passionate about, and I know Alex is pretty passionate about this too. So thank you for your encouragement. Did you explore a company like Daisy or Rehadapt that makes durable mounts for wheelchairs for heavier devices? Certainly not under $100, but hits the mark for stability. Yeah, cool. Alex, did you look into either of those companies?
I don't believe so. Can you say them again?
It's all caps DAESSY, Daisy,
Okay.
or Rehab Apt, Rehab APT, all caps. Yeah, that's definitely, thank you. Thank you for sharing about that. Yeah, again, this is all kind of new grounds for us, so that's really great. I know there's another company called Ram Mounts who build a lot of really nifty mounts, some specifically for wheelchairs, and holding things like phones and alternative or augmentative and alternative communication devices, AAC devices, but they don't have the right kind of grippy bit for an optic, so that there wasn't anything that Ram Mounts made that we could use for this. But maybe they would like to make a mount for an optic. All right. Oh, Alex, did you consider the difficulty of finding a bird with a scope versus binoculars or monoculars? Looking down into a scope can feel counterintuitive to some, rather than directing your eyes in the direction of the bird.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely experienced a lot of that to be honest with you, I haven't really had a lot of experience with spotting scopes before this. So having the opportunity to really put myself in the place, like I actually trialed it in a wheelchair myself so that I could get the experience of, birding from the wheelchair. And yeah, I did have a lot of issues using the scope. And I feel like that's why partly I agreed with the fact that by having having a wider field of view and a less magnification, such as you might find with the binocular, is a little bit easier. So yeah, I agree with that. It's a little bit more difficult to use the scope sometimes.
What about the angled thing versus the straight thing?
Yeah, so again, kind of going back to a scope like this. So for me, I personally liked being able to look down at the scope. I felt that was a little bit more comfortable for myself when I'm sitting in the wheelchair, just for some of the reasons I mentioned. Because like I feel like if I'm supporting it up here when I'm in the wheelchair, then my arms are getting a little bit more tired than if I'm able to mount it a little bit lower, then my arms can be more relaxed and I can let the eyepiece come to me a little bit more. If that makes sense.
But I suspect different people will have different preferences, like most
Right.
things in life. And yeah, it's a great point. Many monoculars are usually a straight tube, basically, and you can get spotting scopes that are a straight tube, and you can get spotting scopes with the angle. And different people will have different preferences. It's a really great point about it might be counterintuitive to look down an angle at a bird versus directly kind of at the bird through optics. It may depend on how long someone has been birding or like their familiarity with the equipment. If it's a beginner bird outing, perhaps you want the straight barrels, not the angled barrels, because people are brand new to the whole thing. So yeah, but different people may have different, there might be some, really good reasons that different people prefer one over the other. Definitely a consideration for sure. Straight and angled scopes, they're very light. Yeah, light enough to put in a large pocket. Yeah, from Vortex, these are some recommendations here. Yeah, and everyone's going to have different preferences, which is why it's really cool to talk about. We're trying really hard in this research not to be prescriptive, like this is the optic you should buy if you meet these criteria, and if you don't, you should buy this stuff, because everyone's going to have different preferences for all kinds of reasons. So what we were trying to do here is identify what features might be helpful for you to consider when you're looking for your own optics, and what already exists and what could be improved on. Will you be somewhere sharing the list of mounts that don't work for heavy objects? Help keep people from wasting money on things that don't work. Yeah, all the mounts and all the optics that were trialed will be in the journal article. So that's where that information will go. Awesome. Okay. Quite a few thank yous. And the 3-axis high precision phone adapter comes from Paul as the adapter that had all the nifty movable parts. Super cool. Okay. We got to the end of the questions. That's awesome. So much discussion and really cool ideas. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for sharing your ideas and asking the questions. And yeah, this is awesome. The learning curve is fast on angles. Point the body towards the bird, not the eyepiece, but the angled allow the cant of the eyepiece into any position. Right. The scope has to have the ring Alex showed, and many small scopes don't have that ring that allows the whole scope to rotate while staying stationary.
There's a ring on this particular scope that's on the screen as well that you can see close to the focus wheel there too. So that scope also had that capability.
Yeah, that seems like a super helpful feature. Because another thing that we found in this study was that there were some mounts that were really stable and strong, but they held the optic in a place that wasn't helpful for the user for various reasons. But having a scope or binoculars wouldn't do this. Having a scope that can shift in space just a little bit might allow someone to use that really sturdy, strong mount and the optic if they can get their head in the right position for it. Yeah, just the more flexibility products have, the more people can use them, right? Like flexibility in use is a principle of universal design. By the way, if you're unfamiliar with universal design, you should look up Principles of Universal Design. It's very, very cool. It applies to designing physical locations, products, online experiences, programs, even kind of it's a cool thing to think about when you're thinking about how user-friendly things are. Awesome. Okay. Alex, do you want to wrap up? Feeling good?
Yeah, if there's no other questions, we are kind of approaching that 2 o'clock hour. So thank you for whoever's left here listening in for the entire hour. Really appreciate all the support and comments in the chat, and for just listening in today to learn about everything that we've accomplished. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Thank you everyone for coming. Alex, there were 50 people here, which is amazing. 50 folks here, 20 still left. Thanks you all for sticking around. Thank you again for being interested. Please share about this with everybody you know, because we want to help make sure that birding is as inclusive and accessible as possible for everybody who wants to join in. Again, my name's Freya McGregor. accessbirding.com is where you can find me if you're interested in working with me in any way. And I will send out the recording of this in the next couple of days. So awesome. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.